What is up, NFL fans, and welcome back to another episode of the NFL Whip Around. I'm your host, Jeff Hartman, joined by Coach Kevin Smith. We've got a lot to discuss today in NFL circles. Before that, a quick call to action. If you're watching this on YouTube, do us a favor, like the video, subscribe to the Fans First Sports Network YouTube channel. You won't want to miss anything that we put out there, as well as if you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, follow the show, subscribe, give us a 5-star rating if you want to. That way you don't miss anything here on the FFSN NFL feed. All right, Coach. What's going on?
Hey, it's happening, Jeff. We're really getting started now. It feels like we've been building towards this for a long time. So I'm pretty excited.
Yeah, I mean, some teams are already starting to report to training camp and they're getting the wheels in motion. And I think I saw some video of the Baltimore Ravens reporting to camp and Lamar Jackson. So it's excited. So we're getting ready to head to training camp. Not all teams are reporting this week. Some are reporting next week, but it means that, training camp in and of itself has changed a lot in the NFL. It used to be weeks of 2 or 3 a day practices, full pads every day. Now it's 3.5 weeks. It's very monitored, very cautious. They wear the Guardian skull caps or whatever you want to call them. I think that's what they are. Some say the conditions aren't tough enough. Some say that it's not conducive to having these players really prepared for the game. What's your take on training camp and the way it looks now in the National Football League?
Well, I think they've significantly changed for good reason. And I'm not saying this was the only reason, but the death of Corey Stringer back in 2001 from heat exhaustion, heat stroke at Vikings training camp had a huge impact on the CBA and the way in which the leverage really that the players were then able to kind of bring to the table. And so, yeah, it's a kinder, gentler camp. You have to have mandatory days off. You're not allowed to be on the practice field more than 4 hours combined a day, whether those are walkthroughs or padded practices. The first couple of days, you can't do anything on the field. It's really just meetings and physicals and those types of things. You contrast that to, I remember reading stories about Don Shula would practice pretty much from sun up to sundown and withhold water because he said that it was a sign of weakness, like the old Herman Boone line from Remember the Titans, water's for the weak. So we've come a long way. I think there's a legitimate concern as to whether or not a 3.5-week training camp with 3 exhibition games in which the starters only play a really small handful of actual reps, is that producing a poor early product, or does that lead to some early season injuries? I think that's a good question, but it's definitely a smarter version of camp.
Okay, so Coach, let me ask you from a player's perspective, and then also it's going to mirror you as a coach and with something you've done for a very long time. So you were a player back when it was 2-a-days, and I'm sure you can remember days of grueling practices, whether it's high school, whether it was college, when you played safety in college. Now that you think about today's landscape, and this goes all the way to high school with what you can and cannot do in terms of, I know in the state of Maryland where I live, they can only practice during certain times of the day. If they're going to have 2 practices, they have to be before a certain time or after a certain time. Do you feel like in today's day and age, the players are missing anything that you might have had when you had the 2-a-days in the heat? You mentioned the withholding of water and all that stuff from those old school coaches. What's your take on that? Are they missing anything today that you had back in the day with the old school approach?
I mean, maybe they're missing the shared experience of group misery. I don't know. No, I don't think so. I think, I don't know how it is in every state. In New Jersey, I can practice all summer under very limited conditions. Once we get into August now, I can put pads on, etc. But I have a much more time to prepare. When you and I were growing up, I mean, the reason you had 3-a-days was because you literally were not allowed to do any kind of organized training throughout the summer until you had to cram it into this small window before your games actually began. This is a smarter approach. It's definitely spread out more. Now, because you have a much bigger window, coaches take advantage of it. If I'm not practicing all summer, I'm falling behind everybody. That's a downside. Kids don't really have a summer. So in that sense, the NFL's kind of got it right in the regard that, like, they've got these guys for a limited time. They're very, very structured. Whereas, in high school right now, I mean, if I wanted to go 5 days a week from June to September, I could do that. So I think there's an argument to be made for both. I think the treatment of the player today is just so much better than it once was.
Yeah.
But the rules are very, very different, and the amount of time you have them for is so much greater.
Well, let's connect the dots with the National Football League and the proposal from the Players Association, which has not been in any way ratified or has even been accepted amongst the union, of potentially changing up. We talked about this before, but since we're talking about camp again, let's bring it up once again about getting rid of this month-long period from mini camp to training camp and basically saying after the draft, then you have a break, then you go into your OTAs, and then it all ramps up into training camp. With all the stuff that you just said, do you think that's a good idea for the NFL, or should they stick to the way that it is, giving the players a little bit of a respite before going to training camp?
I think that the players and the coaches really like the time off between the end of mini camp and the start of training camp. I mean, it's really like their family time, their vacation time. They're obviously responsible for training on their own. They're not they're not at the facility, and the coaches can't monitor every little thing that they do, but they're professionals. And if they don't do it, they won't be in the league. So I think from the players' perspective and the coaches' perspective, this window from mid-June to mid to late July, 5-6 weeks that they really get to themselves, is a big deal. And I think that they would have a hard time giving it up and essentially being at the facility for 7 months consecutively. That sounds pretty awful, especially if you're trying to have a family, be married, and carry on a functional relationship.
That's true. And so this all ties into the preseason, which is our next topic of conversation. It used to be 6 games. You used to have 6 preseason games. A lot of fans that are listening to this might not know that. Now it's down to 3. It could be reduced to 2. And a lot of talking points coming up early this week, even from ESPN's Adam Schefter, about how the 18-game schedule with 2 bye weeks is a foregone conclusion. It's just a matter of time, and it's going to happen. Where do you stand, though, on reducing these preseason games to 2 and then eventually an 18-game schedule? What do you think about that, Coach?
I don't know, man. I have a hard time trying to see how you're going to get your guys ready to play from both a execution and safety standpoint with just 2 exhibition games, unless, of course, you decide that your starters are going to play the bulk of one of those. If you give the way it works now, you know how it works now. Like the starters might play a series in one preseason game, then they might play a quarter in the next one, and then they don't play the third one at all.
Yeah.
There's a lot of questions about whether or not that's enough. You can't have 2 preseason games where you just basically don't play your starters and then bang, here's 18 straight games. So I think you're gonna have to make some tough decisions about how and do you choose that first preseason game to play him and then rest him in the second one because you don't want to get him hurt? Do you do it the opposite? Because obviously in the first preseason game, you're still trying to look at a lot of guys on the roster and make decisions about whether to cut them or not. I think narrowing it to 2 makes for some difficult decisions.
Is there a workaround, though, that's something we've already talked about on the show that made news on Monday with Pittsburgh Steelers fans, and that is the joint practice? Is there a workaround for these teams that say, all right, you want to go to 2 preseason games? Sure. We're going to have teams that are close to us that might train near us, and we're going to have them in for a joint practice. And we're going to have these practices that's going to give us another opportunity to evaluate what we have, those fringe players, give our starters a chance to knock the rust off. The preseason, even if it's just 2 games, will become more of a formality unless the NFLPA and owners say, look, those aren't happening anymore. Is that a workaround in your opinion?
Yes, and I absolutely think you'll see more of that because you have to get that work in and you have to get it in something that resembles a live situation. I've been to Steelers training camp. It's competitive, no doubt about it, but it's far from live football. Unless, of course, you go to like maybe the Friday Night Lights practice or something like that. It's not what you really want to see in order to make the difficult decisions and evaluations that you have to as a coaching staff. You got to see something a little bit more realistic. And yes, you can get that in the joint practices.
Let me just say that I'm all in on the 18-game schedule, and I'll tell you why. Because if they eliminate one preseason game, so they start a week earlier, you add in a bye week, a second bye week, so you're going to be going a week later. That puts the Super Bowl when? Right around President's Day, which everyone is typically a 3-day weekend. I've been clamoring since I can remember about how the day after the Super Bowl should be a holiday, and it might just work out that way. My thing is, and this is a good question to ask you, do you think they'll stop at 18, or is this just going to keep going?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I did read that, and I don't know if this is accurate or not, but I did read that the Monday after the Super Bowl is the day where there's the most employee missed work days on the entire year, the most calling in sick
Exactly. Yeah, so
across
just make
America.
it a holiday.
Yeah, so you're losing a lot of production on that Monday as a company. Um, at what point are you physically unable to hold a team together if you keep adding games? I mean, think about last year. Last year was an absolute massacre of quarterbacks. Some of the biggest name quarterbacks in the league getting hurt and being lost for long periods of time. And they've already bent over backwards to change the rules to protect quarterbacks. So you keep piling on games, then you're going to have to live with the fact that you're also going to greatly increase the amount of missed time by your star players, and the product is not going to be as good. So will that matter to the owners? I don't know, man. If it's more money for them, and if you keep putting butts in seats and getting eyeballs on TVs, I don't think they'll care.
I think, it was 16 games for such a long time. I think that if they eventually get to 18, which I think we all agree they will, I think it's going to be 18 for a very long time before they even entertain expanding that into something different. So let's not put the cart before the horse. We'll stop at that. Let's go to our next topic. And we're talking about the Chicago Bears. There's a lot of attention on the Bears. They're having the Hard Knocks training camp at their facility. There's a lot of people just hyped up about Caleb Williams, Roma Dunze. Well, those rookies have not signed their contracts yet, which is very interesting. And so all but 5 round 1 picks throughout the league have signed. Do you think Chicago should be concerned that their prize rookies are possibly going to not show up to report to camp based on the fact that they have no contract? What are your thoughts on that?
I don't get what's going on there. I walk that back a little bit. Williams has a really weird situation because of the way in which his agent, or lack thereof, are you familiar exactly with his agent situation? Like, he's got an agent who is not like a certified player agent, and therefore in many regards he's acting as his own agent.
Okay.
And so I think that there's probably some issues with that. Now, granted, for this first contract, there's not a whole lot to negotiate. You can negotiate kind of like when payments are made, but your rookie contract is slotted in. Like, he's kind of slotted in at the number 1 pick as to like what he's going to make and how it's all going to be structured. So I think there's some nuance to the negotiation, but I don't understand really why his deal hasn't gotten done unless they just sort of can't come to an agreement about some of the payment schedule. And Odunze as the number 9 overall pick, it doesn't make any sense for him not to have signed at this point. Again, because like all these things are slotted. It's not like you're negotiating for more money. Like, you don't get to negotiate that on your rookie deal. So it just feels
they can negotiate a signing bonus, I believe.
okay.
But that would be the only negotiating chip in this process.
Okay. So yeah, but it just feels like, I don't know, man. Like that's an unfinished business that shouldn't be unfinished. And if you're the Bears with your long history of kind of screwing things up, right, and especially at the quarterback position, it just feels like, this is foundational stuff. Let's have this stuff tied up before we get to camp, so it doesn't have to be any kind of a distraction.
I was more shocked by the fact that there's 5 picks, and these are just 2 of them. And there's 3 other first-round picks that have not signed their rookie contracts. I agree with you. What are you waiting on? I do recall last year, the Pittsburgh Steelers, whom we obviously root for and cover for Fans First Sports Network at the Steel Curtain Network. Joey Porter Jr. didn't sign his rookie contract until I think it was the week of training camp, and then they finally got his deal done. Now, he still was at OTAs. He was at mandatory minicamp. all without a contract. They finally got the deal done, and then you're moving on with your life. So we'll see if they sign their deals. I imagine that they will. They're not going to want to miss any part of training camp, showing up on time. I mean, that's something that used to be pretty commonplace. You would have quarterbacks that would say, I'm going to hold out until I get as much as I can. I believe that Sam Bradford was the last quarterback to really cash in on a rookie deal before they changed with the new collective bargaining agreement. But this is going to be interesting. Do you think, though, either of these two Chicago Bears miss any training camp?
Probably not. It certainly would not benefit Caleb Williams. It wouldn't benefit either of them, but Caleb Williams is not just expected to be the starting quarterback, but has an awful lot of hype coming with him. But it also feels like, and this is just my personality, other people would be not bothered at all by this. It just feels like there's a lot that comes with him that distracts you from the mission. And the mission is to get him playing the best possible football and win football games. But it just feels like there's all this other stuff. And there have been guys who have been very, very successful in the NFL who have had a lot of other stuff coming with them, a lot of distractions. But for a rookie top overall pick who is supposed to be the franchise quarterback and savior of a perennially downtrodden franchise, I just want to minimize the distractions as much as possible. And to me, this is just another one. I'm not saying he won't be successful, but if he's not successful, I won't be surprised.
It's going to be interesting. Let's go to our next talking point with training camps here. And that's obviously the general theme of our show today. What's one big training camp story that you're going to be paying attention to over the next few weeks? Anything in particular?
Well, I'm going to follow the quarterbacks. I really think that there's some intrigue there with the number of it was a historic draft for the number of quarterbacks taken in the first round. I think there's some interesting, they're not really battles because you know that these draft picks are going to eventually take over the spot. But how soon? Like, how soon will Drake May get the job up in New England? How soon will Jaden Daniels get the job in Washington? What the heck is going on in Denver? Who's going to – is Jared Stidham really going to go into the season as the number one guy? Or is Bo Nix, who they've been singing his praises, it's almost like an overcompensation, right? Because everybody questioned how early they picked him. Is he for real? Is he that guy? Is he going to win that job out of camp? I think that'll be interesting to watch.
I'm going to stick close to home and say the AFC North quarterbacks, and there's a reason why. So you have Lamar Jackson coming off an MVP season. They lose in the AFC Championship game. And he made a business decision this offseason to just not show up to workouts and things like that and lost a lot of money. Enough money that I couldn't even imagine just saying, yeah, I'm not going to show up. You can keep the money. Like it's just unfathomable. He's going to have a lot of hype surrounding him naturally. So Joe Burrow's coming off his injury. Is his arm and his wrist and forearm going to be the same? Deshaun Watson's coming off of injury in Cleveland. And they also brought in Jameis Winston as like an insurance policy in case he's not okay. And my gosh, we've talked about it ad nauseum. The Pittsburgh Steelers quarterback position has been completely redone. I think we all agree that the AFC North is the most complete division in the NFL. It is the toughest division in the NFL. And I think the quarterbacks at every single team they're going to be absolutely vital to the success or failures of the organization. It starts in training camp. You talk about Pittsburgh with Russell Wilson getting his feet wet, Justin Fields learning the system, learning from Russ, the injuries, and Joe Burrow and Watson. This is going to be intriguing. That's what I'm looking for, Coach. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, the AFC North will be especially intriguing when you consider that they're going to be the in-season Hard Knocks as a division. Yep. Be fascinating to watch. Every one of those teams had a winning record last year, super competitive. I think that the Steelers, it's not a training camp battle because Russell Wilson is going to be the starter there. But I think that is going to make for some really, really interesting football to watch because Justin Fields is really talented. And I'm not saying that there will be a quarterback controversy in Pittsburgh, but those other three situations, you have a much more sort of solidified quarterback situation at the top, and there won't be as many questions if the starter struggles, whereas in Pittsburgh, Wilson doesn't get out of the gate. You'll probably start to hear it early from Steeler fans, the rumblings for Justin Fields.
And there's not many, if any, training camp in the NFL that is more public than the Pittsburgh Steelers in Latrobe, Pennsylvania at St. Vincent College. Every single practice, I think, except for a handful, are open to the public. People get free tickets. They show up. They can film stuff with their cell phones. You get an unbelievable amount of video, clips, highlights, lowlights of training camp. And so people are going to know really quick, is Russell Wilson showing out? Is Justin Fields showing up? Like, all this stuff is going to be out there for the world to see. It's going to be absolutely intriguing. So that's what I'm looking forward to seeing. Let's go to our fifth topic here. One team, as we head into training camp, who you feel is in put up or shut up mode. In other words, who's a team that you think needs to back up the hype in 2024?
I think it's the Ravens. I mean, there's a lot of teams out there that you could sort of make this argument about. But Baltimore's been really good in the Lamar Jackson era, and they just have not been good enough. They haven't reached the Super Bowl, and it's been these big sort of crushing disappointments for the Ravens. They have these great regular seasons or these great starts to the regular season. You go back to 2020, they lose to Buffalo in the divisional round at home. 2021, they get off to a great start, and then they wind up losing their last 6 games and missing the playoffs. 2022, they lose to the Bengals in the divisional round. Last year, they get the number 1 seed. They do everything right. The Chiefs look vulnerable. They have to come into Baltimore in the AFC Championship game, and it just felt like, okay, this is it. The Ravens, Lamar Jackson's going to get over the hump. The Ravens are going to the Super Bowl. Nope, Chiefs beat them. And now, they lost their DC. And I think like it feels like the Ravens, as good as they've been for a long time, John Harbaugh and the Ravens have been very much like Mike Tomlin and the Steelers in that, they're going to be competitive and in the mix every year. But the last several years with a so-called elite quarterback like Lamar Jackson, they've come up short. And I think after this year, if they do it again, there's going to be some serious questions asked.
And I know this living in Maryland, there were questions asked before Lamar got the contract. And there were a lot of people that were saying, like, hey, you say what you want about Joe Flacco. He bet on himself and won a Super Bowl and was the MVP that year. So therefore, that makes sense because he put up or shut up, like you mentioned. Flacco did it. Lamar hasn't done it yet. I'm going to stay in the AFC, but I'm going to go with the Buffalo Bills. I think the Buffalo Bills, they made some very odd, I'll use the term odd to keep it nice, the very odd decisions this past offseason in terms of getting rid of players, whether you're talking about Stephon Diggs, cutting ties with some veteran players on the defensive side of the ball. I believe Jordan Poyer was one of those players that got released. They let their center go. There were a lot of interesting moves made, and a lot of them were salary cap purposes, and I understand that. But the Buffalo Bills with Josh Allen at the quarterback, at the helm, they're expected to be Super Bowl contenders. And ever since the 13-second collapse in Kansas City, something happened. And they have not been that team. So you talk about hype. You talk about put up or shut up. To me, that screams Buffalo Bills. Because if you don't get it done now, I think Sean McDermott could be gone. I think he's on the hot seat. And when you look at the general manager, I'm not even sure who that is, up in Buffalo, they made those decisions that were made. And people might say, well, that was for salary cap purposes. Well, who put them in those salary cap situations? The same 2 people that I'm talking about. So I'm going to go with Buffalo. Coach, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, the Bills are all those reasons, and that division's getting better.
Yeah,
and that's going to be especially if the Jets wind up being good. It's going to get tricky for Buffalo. Real quick, over in the NFC, I thought you were going to go with the Cowboys because I feel like they're a perennially. It feels like put up or shut up, and they never put up. So I just wish they'd shut up. But they are, from a contract standpoint, really in a year where they need to win because it's going to get really hard to pay everybody. Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, eventually Micah Parsons. Those guys are going to command big salaries, and you just feel like Mike McCarthy is another guy who just feel like, hey man, he's on the hot seat. And if they don't have a big year, man, I think I don't know what they're going to do. They might blow it up.
Hey, you want me to give you another NFC team? To me, it's the Detroit Lions. I know that's your son's favorite team because, everyone will say like last year's NFC Championship game, some really bad decisions were made and people love that coaching staff and they think they have them headed in the right direction. I feel like that's a team that could be set up for a failure, though. They could be set up for a letdown. And it's just difficult. It's difficult in the National Football League to have sustained success, and they've been moving in the right direction. And sometimes, you pay Jared Goff the big money, you pay Amon-Ra St. Brown the big money, and it doesn't always pay dividends. So at some point, getting there is not enough. You got to actually do it. You got to get through that. You got to get over that proverbial hump. We'll see if Dan Campbell can get it done. But if Dan Campbell screws it up again, that's a bad look. That, I guess it depends on how you viewed the NFC Championship last year, which I think we talked about. I said he screwed it up. You might have disagreed. I can't remember.
Well, he danced. What's that quote? Dance with the horse that brung you. He did that. He certainly did that.
Yeah.
He did not change his MO, and that's obviously why there's a controversy.
Absolutely. All right. I want to give plenty of time for our profile, not a player profile. And that is Kevin Stefanski, the head coach of the Cleveland Browns. And the reason why we want to talk about Coach Stefanski is, in case you follow our feed on the podcast side, you notice that Coach's Call Sheet podcast ran on Monday. Normally runs on Thursdays. It ran on Monday. You might be wondering why. It was because Coach Kevin Smith it was a Kevin on Kevin situation. Coach Kevin Smith interviewed Kevin Stefanski. Coach, what was that like? Tell me about it.
Well, first of all, I've had the pleasure now, really for the last couple of weeks, to be around Coach Stefanski. He is on vacation in our hometown here, and he reached out to me through some people that we know in town mutually, and wanted to know if I minded if he came around our practices. And I was like, no, I don't mind. So and so he's been coming to our practices, and he and I have had a chance to sort of sit down and talk about a lot of things. I can't say enough about the guy. I mean, he just is, first of all, the absence of ego has been wonderful. I mean, there hasn't been a single moment where he's kind of been like, big time NFL guy. This is a guy who's the 2-time coach of the year as well. So the absence of ego, how patient and that he's just been in allowing our staff to pick his brain. Today at our practice, we were going through a 7-on-7 drill, which is just sort of like a skeleton offensive receivers against defensive backs drill. And he was basically coaching up our quarterback through the drill. It's been a fantastic experience with him. And I can't say enough for how intelligent he is, but how his personality is one that allows for you to feel like you're kind of on equal terms with him. And that was when he and I sat down and did the interview. I wanted to talk about quarterbacks with him because he's worked with quarterbacks for a long time. He's worked with some of the biggest names in the business, Brett Favre and Kirk Cousins and Deshaun Watson, guys like that. And we had a 20-minute conversation about the nature of quarterback play. Why is it the hardest position to play in sports? What makes a great quarterback? What are some of the things that often cause quarterbacks to fail in the NFL at its highest level? And how do you manage them as a coach? I think if you're a fan who's interested in learning more about the quarterback position specifically, but really the game through a coach's eyes, it was a really awesome conversation. So hopefully people will check it out.
Yes, highly recommend it. And you can get it on the audio side just by being here with the FFSN NFL feed. If you're watching on YouTube or you enjoy watching, we can go check it out at our Fans First Sports Network YouTube channel. You'll get that one-on-one interview. You can see Coach Kevin Smith talking with Coach Stefanski. And I just thought it was fascinating when I listened to it, and I've watched it and listened to it. When he was talking about how he communicates with the quarterback before the ball is snapped. You get that, 14 seconds? And he's just talking about it. And it's amazing how much a coach has to remember, an offensive play caller. Hey, just remember, if they go too high, they like to do this, this, and this before the snap. And it's amazing. It's so crazy how dialed in these coaches are. And it was a masterclass. I didn't understand everything that he talked about when he talked about different coverage schemes and how they like to diagram things, but absolutely fascinating. Coach, you did a tremendous job. I recommend everyone go check it out. Was there anything in particular that you took away from it that you learned maybe from being around Coach Stefanski?
He's a really bright guy. He went to the University of Pennsylvania, and you can see why. the thing I think that I really has leapt out to me about him is his ability to sort of organize everything in his mind. When we were talking informally about a few things, he started to sort of break down how he teaches route or the quarterback to go through route progressions. And he was speaking sort of systematically about it's you do this and you do this and you do that. And he made it sound really, really simple, but it's not. I mean, it was incredibly involved. And as I was listening to him, I kept thinking to myself, he's got all this data and all this information in his head that he's able to compartmentalize so that he can use it where he needs to. And I think that's really tricky. You know, like I know a lot of really smart people who are not functionally smart because they can't access some of the things that they know when they need to access it. And he seemed to be the kind of guy that in the heat of battle, I've talked about this on my Call Sheet podcast before, you really have as a play caller about 8 seconds when one play ends to the next play, as the next play begins, to sort of decide what you want to run. And when you decide that, you have to incorporate so much information, like what hash is the ball on? What's the down and distance? What coverage are they going to be in? Am I expecting a blitz? And all this stuff is going through your head in literally seconds. And then you've got to pick the right play, call it, communicate the information you want to the quarterback through the headset. I don't get to do that, but he does. If you're not organized and if you can't compartmentalize information in a way that's accessible, you're going to fail. And so there's plenty of offensive coordinators, defense coordinators, et cetera, throughout the league who don't do well. And it's probably not because they don't understand X and O's. These guys are all brilliant with the X and O's. It's probably because they can't function in the moment as well as others can. And I sort of understood that. I said, hey, this guy's a great play caller because, yes, he knows the game of football inside and out, but he strikes me as the kind of guy who can get to the things he wants to get to while he's under the gun. And that's not easy to do.
Yeah, I took away from it that people sometimes don't think there's a lot of coaching in the NFL. They think that basically these guys are so good, they just go out and do it. I think there's still a lot of coaching that goes on at the National Football League level, from grizzled veterans all the way down to rookies. So, coach,
well, he made that point real quick. He made that point when he was talking about Tom Brady, and he said one of the reasons Tom Brady succeeded was because he landed in the right situation where he would be coached the right way, and that Tom Brady could have wound up getting into the wrong situation as a 6th round pick and gotten buried on the depth chart, and maybe the greatest player ever never would have had a chance.
Yeah, interesting stuff. Great job, Coach. That's your call sheet for this week, so we don't have to ask you what's on the docket there. We'll be back next week for another NFL Whip Around. Folks, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Take it easy. We'll see you next week.